All right. Hello and welcome to the next session. We have Costa Rican heirlooms with Gabriel Bravo. I am so excited for this. I've had a few minutes here to be able to talk with Gabriel beforehand, and this is going to be great. I'm Mike Bollinger, the Executive Director at Seed Savers Exchange, and I'll be your host for the session. I'd like to offer a special thank you to Rancho Gordo for sponsoring this session. Rancho Gordo is a specialty producer and seller of heirloom beans based in Napa County, California, and they've generously contributed to support today's event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge our community agreements. Let me just pull those up here. And let's keep these in mind today as we're listening to Gabriel and we're engaging in the chat. It's really important to embrace these community agreements. So let's be respectful and curious. Let's be patient. Make sure if you're contributing, you're speaking from your own experiences. Let's avoid jargon and let's be conscious of intent versus impact here. We can take space and make space and also take care of yourself in this. Let's collectively embrace these responsibilities. So Gabriel Bravo is co-founder of Finca El Tablazo, an agroecological integrated seed producing farm, and Semillas Plantae, Costa Rican pioneering seed company. He has more than 10 years experience in agroecology and has led more than 15 seed workshops at a national level. When Gabriel reached out through our conference invite, he let us know that Costa Rica is well known for its national parks and its rich biodiversity, yet it's also one of the most heavy pesticide users in the world, with a big agroindustrial influence and worrying genetic erosion. Excuse me. This session will explore the context and important historic, cultural, and culinary aspects of several Costa Rican heirloom varieties. And it also addresses how a lack of significant seed-saving culture has made it even more imperative for home gardeners and farmers to rescue and promote these varieties. Gabriel, thank you so much for being here today. I look forward to hearing you speak and present over the course of the next hour. And at the tail end of this, when you're finished, we'll come back on. And if there are questions, we'll have some time for a question and answer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. I'm really thankful to Seed Savers Exchange for the opportunity to present. And yeah, we'll talk a lot about my country, my context, the history a bit, and try to get you guys a little bit acquainted with the work that we're doing here and what's happening with Costa Rica and our varieties and our agricultural culture, right? So Costa Rican heirlooms exploring the country's agrodiversity. My name is Gabriel, and I just want to start out talking a little bit about myself, a little bit of context. My name is, well, Gabriel Bravo. I'm a typical city kid. I'm the typical new rural movement kind of youngsters that, well, I'm almost in my 40s now. I've been doing this for more than 10 years, almost 15. But I didn't grow up planting beans and corns with my grandfather in agricultural fields. I really don't have an agricultural background, but when I went into it, I think it's the best decision I've ever made in my life. Super hard, a lot of struggles, a lot of frustration, but also a lot of happiness, a lot of victories, a lot of fulfilling moments. So yeah, it was typical city kid with going to the movies. I really grew up in one of the most densely populated towns of San Jose, which is the central region of the country. Over 300,000 people live in the city. Ironically, I have the farm located like maybe 5 miles south from this city, because we're like in the urban rural kind of fringe area where you leave the urban area and you enter a more mountain dense rural area really fast. So I think although I grew up in this area, I still kept living in the same region, right? I'm the co-founder of Finca El Tablazo. You guys can check it out later. It's fincaeltablazo.com. It's a website for the farm. A pretty pioneering farm, an agroecological farm dedicated to education, and I've done a lot of different journeys in the farm. Really, with my wife, I'm gonna introduce my wife at least verbally. I think I'm sure she's 50% of everything I've done in my life. So I'm really appreciated. I have a lot of appreciation for her and all the hard work she's done along my side. So yeah, we started the farm over maybe 12 years ago now, and we've done it all. We've done all the vegetable farming production for the farmers markets on the weekends. We've done CSA programs associating ourselves with other colleague farmers. Um, we've done a lot of education, different purposes, from very small city kids to universities to very technical farming tour guides. Like, we do a lot of education in the farm, so it's a main focus. But now we're specialized in seed production, so we're 100% a seed farming, a seed farm production kind of method in the farm. So we've done seeds from the beginning, from scratch, but more professionally and seriously and completely focused around 6 or 5 years ago now. So that's where Semillas Plantae comes along. Semillas Plantae, it's a seed company that I'm a co-founder with my wife and two other associate friends. We're three main producing farms in the country. And this year we started subcontracting farms and small growers and home gardeners as well for seed production. So it's been quite a journey starting the company from scratch. I had to develop a lot of skills. I had to become a website developer, a graphic designer, a salesman, directive, and all these aspects of my life that I was never imagining that I would have to do later on. But here I am, and I still have my origins, and I have my essence as a farmer and a seed farmer. So really happy with the whole journey. Uh, really happy with my grandmother as well. I started farming, home gardening with my grandmother back in the city. That's how my passion on farming and seeds really started 15 years ago, starting with a very small garden and never imagining I will end up like in 1 hectare of land 15 years later being a seed farmer with a company. And so it's a dream, and that's why I try to consider myself as a powerful dreamer. I don't know if you guys like stand-up comedy, but I like Dave Chappelle. The last show he did, it was like, it's called about being a powerful dreamer. And when I saw the show and the whole introduction, like, I felt so related to the concept of being powerful dreamers and being we have to be hopeful somehow of and give significance to the work that we do and why we wake up every day. And I think this whole journey of my life has allowed me to to give purpose to what I do, right? From all the messed up things that are happening in the world and all the messed up things that happen with the agricultural business and how we are as consumers and all these kind of aspects, right? So I think when it's when you stop dreaming, I think it's time to die. Like, you have to dream all the time. Okay. We're starting a little bit with the context of the country. So I like to say the two sides of the coin, because usually Costa Rica only portrays the beautiful side of it, but we have our ugly part as well, for sure. But I love this country. I really love everything that it represents, our history, our wildlife, our forests. But I also want to show the reality, of a lot of things that are going on that A lot of people don't appreciate to see, or they don't see when they just come for tourism and just see all the beautiful beaches and all the beautiful rivers and super forests, and like we have some things going on, right? Um, for those of you guys who don't know where Costa Rica is, Costa Rica is a Central American country. We're neighbors in the north with Nicaragua and neighbors in the south with Panama. So we're right in the center of the continent almost, right? We have both the Atlantic Ocean on the east, and we got the Pacific Ocean on the west. So we have a lot of diversity of microclimates and mountain areas and coastal areas and wetlands, and we have incredible diversity. Okay, let's see. Okay, around 57% of the country it has forest areas or forest coverage areas. This doesn't mean it's all super wild primary forest areas, right? This takes into account secondary vegetations, mangroves, primary forests, and many other different kinds of definitions. But it's quite a high percentage of kind of forested and vegetation area. Around 12% of this total area is declared under national parks. So we're super famous for our national parks, coastal national parks, high mountain national parks. So we have a very good, effective environmental ministry system of national protected areas, which is one of the reasons we're so famous, right? There was a big deforestation rate in Costa Rica in the 60s, all the way to the 80s, late 80s. Our forest area diminished from 60% to over 40%, almost 20% lessened in over 2 or 3 decades. A lot of deforestation went for cattling and for coffee plantations and a lot of different agronomical activities. But then a lot of political improvements were made on conservation. A lot of national parks were strengthened, and a lot of laws were passed. And since the 90s and in the decades of 2000, the forest areas really started like increasing, and that's why it gives us like this very good number nowadays that is between 50 and 57%. So this is good. I think this is super positive. Also, the government has like special programs, like say, he has environmental payment services. For example, if I have a property that I have in these primary forest areas and I don't want to develop and I want to keep it that way, I can input this property into the environmental protection system, and the government pays me an annual fee for protecting the forest, for example. So I think this is another good example of positive stuff that goes on. But let's talk a little bit about the negative. Okay, so we got heavy agroindustrial pressure, especially on industries like pineapple and bananas, melons. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pineapple industry, that maybe is one of the biggest ones and the most conflictive or problematic ones. So if you guys see a Costa Rican pineapple, it's happened to me, like I, I had the opportunity to go to Europe maybe like 10 years ago, visiting some farms and some experiences. And I went to one supermarket and it was this beautiful sign with a beautiful, perfect, spotless pineapple saying like, oh, like beautiful Costa Rican pineapple. That's what like the sign says, like. And I was like just really impressed by how ignorant we are as consumers, or how careless we are as consumers of the whole context of products, right? Pineapple really here is it has a lot of infringements over human rights, labor rights, environmental rights, a lot of irregularities, even a lot of employees have been persecuted by transnational companies for making reports about what's going on, about safety issues, about low, not keeping minimum wages, subcontracting a lot of illegal workers, and especially the problem of the expansion of the whole industry. Like currently, pineapple industry is covering over, I think the last numbers was around 37,000 hectares in the country. That's a lot of land, a lot of erosion, a lot of monoculture, a lot of pesticides. I'm going to talk a little bit about the heavy pesticide use that is going on around the country. And the industry has become so big that even in the early 2000s, Costa Rica displaced or replaced Hawaii as the main exporting and producing country in the world. So that's how big the industry is and how problematic it is. I had firsthand experience in university going to visit some Caribbean communities where their water was completely contaminated by heavy pesticides like bromacils, right? That are uh, very very heavy chemicals in the water sources, in the wells. People getting rashes in their communities, so much that they united forces in the community and they forced the government to deliver them weekly these special trucks with water, drinking water tanks, so they can have drinking water in their communities every week, because they don't want to use their own water or for drinking or for their babies or for their children or for washing. So it's a big problem, and the government it's aware of the problem. We're super heavy pesticide users. For example, from 1977 to 2006, we passed from importing over 2,500 tons of active ingredients of pesticides to start importing over 11 tons of active ingredients in a matter of 2 decades. So it's exponential, while the agricultural land of the country really didn't grow that much. It only grew from over 300,000 hectares to 400,000 hectares in that same period of time. So we're importing a lot more product for not even that much agricultural land, being on an expansion process. So there's a lot of corruption around this issue in the country. Um, I heard it firsthand from the environment ministry that happened to be one of the best friends of my father at that time. And he told me himself, right, like, we're trying to regulate the imports of all these pesticides in the country, but the president himself bypassed all these regulations because his brother at that time was one of the main leading owners of the importing chemical company. So that's how it moves, and that's how it happens, not only in Costa Rica but worldwide. We had a great example of a very national disgrace last year, November 2023, where the European Union gave back containers of contaminated melons that were showing high levels of chlorothalonil pesticide, which is a very common use fungicide here, but is not permitted in the European nation, which was showing levels that were like over the permitted levels that they had, but way over. And national disgrace, like being recognized in international levels like this. So we have the ugly side for sure. And we have a lot of cancer, high cancer rates as well in the country, especially in the most heavy pesticide using vegetable production areas in the north of the Central Valley. One of the best agricultural lands are in the north, and I'm very acquainted with this area. I have a lot of colleagues growing in this area. I went to organic farming school, which is located in this area, and just like you see it, like you see it with your own eyes. The smell of the environment is just full of pesticides all the time, no protection while using it. And there's a very bad cultural aspect. Like Costa Ricans are not technical about using the agrochemicals. They just look at it we have this typical notion of like, I'll use it at my own risk with my own formulas, like disregarding completely the technical formulas that should be used to dilute the products. And so we have a big problem. We have a lot of mortality rates have been increased by tumors and cancers in these areas that still there's not a formal study that demonstrates this, but it's extremely coincidental that this kind of things are happening in this area with all these situations happening. So, and we're a very heavy seed importing product as well. Um, we have I was getting these numbers recently from the National Seed Office from the Agronomical Ministry of the country. The last numbers that they have is from 2019. So we're importing a total of over $36 million in 2019 of seed value. For a small country like Costa Rica of 51,000 square kilometers, we're a small country. That's huge, $36 million in seed imports, over $15 million were just for vegetable varieties, which is one of the biggest or more important agronomical crops, and over $500 million was only for corn seeds. So it's bad. Like around 80 or 90% of the seeds that we use for our own national production is all imported seeds. So we're very dependent on imported seeds. You guys listed a little bit of background noise. It's the rain, so hopefully it's not an issue. I hope not. I think not. We're just starting the heavy rainy seasons in Costa Rica, so as a seed farmer, I'm one of the few farmers that were really hoping like the rains would not just start just yet. I have a couple of crops on the field that I want to dry out, but it's starting. The rainy seasons are starting. So this is a very important slide as well. Less national production and increasing imports, not only of seeds, but also of basic grains. We're a very dependent and relying nation for basic food that Costa Ricans demand in very high volumes. Like we're a grain consuming country, especially for rice and beans. We have the famous gallo pinto. Gallo pinto is one of the basic foods where it's rice and beans mixed together that we have for breakfast, and then we have them in other foods for lunch. Like we consume massive amounts of grains. This graphic, I think it's pretty clear, and I think it's very alarming that it compares the year 2000 to the year 2022, almost 2 decades later, what we were importing back then and what we're importing right now. So in the case of rice, you can see in the 2000 it was not even 1% of the imports. 2022 we're importing almost 70% of the rice we consume in the country. So that's alarming. With beans, it's even worse. Back in the 70s or the 60s, we were producing, or we were always self-reliant in our own consumption. Almost 80% of the beans for the national consumption were produced in the country. 2022, we're importing 90% of the beans we're consuming, especially from countries like China or Nicaragua. So I think Costa Ricans, like the general population, they're not aware of how alarming and how vulnerable we are being so reliant on all this excess product from other countries, because other countries really what they're doing, they're supplying themselves. They're just, and all the excess production that they have of these great basic grains is what they're exporting. So we're just getting like leftovers from the international market, and people are not aware of how vulnerable the situation is. I think COVID was a great example. Like um, I think for organic farmers and seed farmers, like COVID was one of the best things that could ever happen for our consciousness, even our business models. Like the sales were going crazy. Like people were really starting to realize like what's happening if everything gets shut down. But now that everything went to normal and we're going back to our own routines, like what's happening, we're not really realizing these figures. So the same with corn. almost 100% of the corn we consume in Costa Rica is imported corn. When back into 2000, it was 64%. So it's bad, quite bad. I want to talk about the seed movement in Costa Rica. Um, as Mike explained, we're a pioneering company. So Semillas Plantae is really like we are the first ones in the country putting out an heirloom, seed saving, open pollinated variety kind of culture in the country. Really like open pollinated varieties and Creole varieties, especially of corns and beans and squashes, which is the typical Meso Central American varieties. We have this seed saving culture from back in the days, from old time farmers in rural and indigenous communities. I think my favorite characters to talk to are all these old time farmers that are still out there with Semillas Plantae has had a great commitment with trying to reach out to these communities, driving around. It's kind of cool because we can drive around the country. Like I can go from north to south in 500 kilometers, maybe not in one day, but maybe it will be like a 12-hour drive. But we can drive around the country pretty easily. Like 5-hour drives will be in the north region, 6-hour drives will be in the south region, 2-hour drives I will be in a very rural area. 45 minutes from my farm, I found a lot of gems and a lot of jewels that are out there waiting to be saved and waiting to be discovered for home gardeners and for keep them going, because really they are the last generation that will save and keep the seeds. Even for them, it's hard to keep the seeds, but their grandkids are not following the same patterns or the same passion for growing or for the same passion for the varieties that have been like going around in their families. So our project has been really trying to commit ourselves to saving this variety. So we're also very proud of the work that we've been doing with home gardeners. When we started the project, we were kind of skeptic and a little bit insecure, saying like, okay, it's the first concept of this kind of company going out there. Like, is there really a market for it? Is there really people that will be worried about this kind of subjects, that will be interested in this kind of varieties? And we've been receiving overwhelming responses from every single beautiful corner of this country, from the most rural lady in their backyard to the most hipster modern guy in their or family in their city apartments, in their potting system, in their balcony. Like, it's been crazy how the project has created a movement that we're very proud to be a part of it. A lot of expat communities, a lot of US citizens, Canadians, Europeans living in the country, a lot of them retired people, a lot of them young people that just want to shift their lives around, live in the beautiful, lush, tropical dream, and getting their businesses here. And this community has been very important for us because they really appreciate the work that we do with seeds and giving access to people to these heirloom varieties, Costa Ricans, Asians, Europeans, and from the northern regions, different kinds of flowers. So right now we have a catalog of around 120 varieties. So we have a very standardized agricultural concept as consumers in Costa Rica. I think it's worldwide. But in the States, I was telling Mike, I had the opportunity to visit the States 4 years ago to go to heirloom festivals and see all the farmers markets and all the cool projects that you guys have going on over there. But you guys have 30 or 40-year-old projects with a lot of experience and a lot of big movements. Still a minority compared to the big population that a country like the States has, but still very important. So we're creating that here, and it's been a struggle and it's been a process, but a beautiful response. We got SIGRAS and the National Seed Office, which we have great relationships with them. SIGRAS is the Investigation Center for Grains and Seeds University of Costa Rica, which is one of the main or most important universities in the country. So they have a very cool lab where they do quality controls, and actually it's the official quality lab control of the country. So we work with them and we have great relationships with them. We have Katia Seed Bank. Katia is a very important private agronomical school in the country, and they have one of the best, most professional seed banks. The whole thing that you see minus 40 degrees Celsius, and the registers that they have, and all the cool seed drying machines they have. And so we have a lot of relationship with them as well. And then we got also Semillas Plantae, which is our project and our company, and is, I think, again, I think we're very proud of the work that we've done. It's 4 associates, and we started from scratch. Each one of us invested, I think, like $50 to start the company back then, and a lot of sacrifices and a lot of things, and creating the movement and really spreading out the preaching about the whole seed world. I think has been very strong and very cool. I have a couple of cool seed stories I would like to share with you guys. I think reflecting and marking out the standardized vegetable culture that we have in the country, like the same kinds of tomatoes for decades. They're red, round, hard. That's it. Stop counting. The same kind of hybrid cucumbers, the same kind of hybrid eggplants, or it's either white corn or it's either yellow corn, and that's it. So when we started really educating Costa Rican consumers and audience about what agrodiversity is and what agrodiversity means, there's been some very positive things, but also it's a long way to go. A couple of stories. I think the first story, they're kind of funny, and I like to share them. When we're doing the CSA programs, we started educating customers about open pollinated varieties and stuff like that. So first time we're growing a chocolate cherry tomato, for example. I don't know if some of you guys are acquainted with the variety, but beautiful small cherry tomato, super sweet, kind of brown, kind of peculiar, kind of looking, but super sweet, great flavor. So on that CSA program, on that delivery, we had chocolate cherry tomatoes going delivery. We had the new customer, quite conventional customer, but reaching out for organic product and supporting local farmers and the whole story. So we give out the chocolate cherries, and we get a phone call, and the customer is like super upset. Like, it's the first time I'm going with you guys. You gave me some bad tomatoes. They have a strange color. They're probably full of, I don't know what she was thinking, like maybe bacteria or who knows what. So I tell the customer, like, hey, did you try the tomato? It's a different variety. We're specializing in that. Said, like, no, I'm not trying. Like, try it. Please try it. I'll give your money back. Just try it. Maybe 10 minutes later, we get a call back saying, I'm so sorry. It's the best cherry tomato I've had in my life. This is an incredible experience. Please keep going, so on. So it's just the concept and how uneducated we are as consumers, right? Once they try it. And the second story goes almost in the same line. Like, I'm always preaching out to colleagues and to other farmers, like, okay, not everybody has to be a seed farming producing kind of concept, because it's hard. Being a seed farmer is way more technical, and the learning curve is bigger. But I'm always preaching out, like, hey, I've been trying so many varieties. Like, last season, our farm produced over 30 different varieties of crops for seed, and I'm always trying new stuff. And I was preaching to this friend, and saying, like, try out these eggplants. I gave him some Rosa Bianca eggplants. Great variety, like super incredibly productive, like incredibly rustic, very resistant. This lilac, beautiful, like round white balls that are kind of sweet and creamy. And I gave him some seeds and said, like, try it out. And he's an organic farmer, but he grows all the hybrids that the market offers and all the basic varieties and always the same stuff that people are asking and reaching out for. So he grew out the eggplants, went to the conventional farmer market, not even an organic market, and he says like, I sold everything, like people were amazed. It was an incredible experience. But this story he's telling me 1 year later, after I gave him the original seed, and I tell him like, first of all, like, why didn't you reach back? Like, why didn't you call me back? Like, you had a great experience. Like, please give me some more seed. Like, this was a success, like. And second of all, say like, why didn't you keep growing, keep differentiating yourself from all the other farmers that are at the market, having unique products, like educating the consumer? And it's just like, I don't know. I just didn't keep going, I just didn't give it much thought, and that was it. And so like, that's the problem, not only in the consumer, but as farmers, we are not seeing the potential on open pollinated, on diversity, on creating differentiated markets. So I wanted to share those two stories that I always remember fondly and kind of funny, but also very significant, and I think with a lot of learning from the stories. Okay, let's keep going. We're starting with the heirlooms now, with Costa Rican heirlooms. I want to give you guys a little bit of a glimpse of what we have going on in the country. This is just a basic, maybe 6 or 7 varieties that I'm going to talk about, but I wanted to show you guys so you guys can know them, and you can know a little bit of the context and the history. We got Maíz Congo and Maíz Pujagua. This is a very special variety. Pujagua, it's a word that comes from Nahuatl language, from Mayan language. We had a lot of Mayan indigenous influence from the north. And when borders and countries didn't really existed, right? And from Nahuatl, Pujagua means spongy or soft. And that's because the culture, the technical aspect of these grains is that it's a very grainy, kind of floury grain. So it has a lot of starch on it. It's a special variety from the northern region of the country, which has a deciduous forest, which is very dry. It has a very dry climate where when it's dry season, like all the forests and all the plants lose their leaves, and it's only the trunks, and everything is like super brown and super dry and grassy, like almost like African kind of grassland kind of vibe. So it's from this kind of regions, and it's very culturally strong from this area. There's 2 types or 2 distinct varieties. The Pujagua one is the one that has more like a lilac color, kind of like more lilac. And then the other one, Congo, is more like a deep dark purple kind of color, but both of them are very starchy and very, very, very grainy. Super endangered crop. Semillas Plantae has done a lot of work to try and rescue this variety, but it's hard to get it nowadays. The old time farmers they've been struggling to save the seed. It's been cross-pollinating a lot with hybrid varieties that they grow around with other farmers. So it's been hard to keep like a pure strain of the varieties. There's 2 main growing seasons for the variety in the north. The rainy season starts in May in Costa Rica, so that's why I told you about rain starting. Actually stopped. So with the first rains in this region, they call it La Primera, which is the first. So they grow 2 growing seasons in the year. And then they have La Postrera, which is like the later season, which they grow out in late August to kind of take advantage of the last 2 months of the rainy season, which is maybe around September and October, which is the heaviest rainy seasons. So they can harvest the grains maybe in December, January. So they have those two main seasons, which is super culturally engraved. I think it's beautiful for them when I hear them talk about La Primera and La Postrera. I think this is has a lot of high cultural value to it. It's kind of ironic because the variety is not very drought resistant, although it grows in a very dry area. That's why they always are super dependent on the rainy seasons, because when the rain season fails or it's a kind of a weird uh, year for the rainfalls, like a lot of the crops really fail. So it's super dependent on rain. It's like 5 or 7 feet tall plants, not super high, and it's quite fast, maybe 100 days for maturing for the grain. Um, I think the culinary uses are super diverse and they're very beautiful. Um, they use them um, a lot of cultural value for. They use them like a lot for funerals and for praying ceremonies. And one of the most famous dishes they make with this is chicheme. And chicheme, it's there's several ways of preparing chicheme. You can do it with, you can harvest the grain almost between going out of green, almost maturing, going to dry. Here we call them that the grain is cospo, is one name of saying it. When it's not tender for eating, but it's not still dry. So you can take this phase of the grain and you can grind it as it is. Usually some people ferment it first, depending if you want the fermented taste of the dish or not, or the kind of like the drink. It's kind of like a porridge, kind of like a more liquidy. Depends on how you want it. Or some people also harvest the dry grain and they let it ferment on water for maybe a couple of days, and then you grind the grain. And then from this grinding process, you get the dough. And when you get the dough, you get like this very fine mesh or this very fine cloth, and you start like trying to release the squeeze out with water the starch from the dough, only the starch, right? And then when you have this starch with the liquid, that's where you boil it. And there's a lot of different recipes. Some people do it with cinnamon, some people do it with ginger. And then you boil this mix for quite a while until the starch starts to thicken the drink or the porridge. So it depends on how thick you want it, and it's very beautiful because it keeps like the lilac or the purple color of the variety, which is super rich in polyphenols and a lot of anthocyanins and a lot of very rich amino acids and substances that make it like super nutritional as well. So I think it's beautiful. Pujawa corn, I have a great relationship with the. I'm very fond of the variety, and it's a very vulnerable, endangered crop, which a lot of people really don't know about, especially in the cities and in other rural areas. So we're doing a lot of work to try and the universities are doing a lot of work. I have a friend also that she started out a company that specializes on this product to try and make people learn about this recipes. And I attach a link to this presentation. It's Pujawa corn documentary. It's in YouTube. Beautiful documentary. It has the subtitles in English. My friend with the company about this product, she made it with some government funds. So if you guys can check it out, it's a beautiful documentary. Makes you cry almost. Second variety, tacaco. Super special variety. There's a very important saying in Costa Rica. There's nothing more Costa Rican than a tacaco. It's an endemic species. That means that it's nowhere to be found anywhere else in the world than in Costa Rica. So we consume it specifically here. It has a lot of special properties to it, a lot of heritage to it. It's kind of a wild plant, but it's the kind of like semi-domesticated, rustic kind of plant. Kind of hard to see nowadays. I know the places where I can find them nearby, in some rural colleagues that I have in other places, but you don't get it that easily. Even like farmers specializing on this crop are like, we're super short on supply at a national level, but people do know it. And it's very traditional for Costa Rican culture, you know, especially for grandmothers and my parents' generation. Like they're very fond of the variety. Super wild plant. The more wild relatives of this species, their fruits are not so good for eating because they're super fibrous and they have like some spiny sections on the outside that is kind of hard to manage. And so there's the other strains or more semi-domesticated varieties that are less spiny, and the meat inside is less fibrous, so it's more delicious and um, uh, it's more tasty, and the whole experience is more agreeable, and it's more uh, easy to get along with the experience. I think the taste is great. When it's very ripe, it's super hard. That's one of the theories of where the name derives from, Tacaco. There's several theories that, let me see here, I have it over here. From indigenous language, the sound is tlacua from Tacaco, which means like to chew. Because if it's very like old varieties and it's very fibrous, like you have to chew a lot on it to like really like try and masticate and get it going. Or tlacuacuac, which is another term from Tacaco. It means that it's like rock hard, like super hard. Like when the fruit is ripe, it's like super hard. There's a very cool recipe I got from an old-time farmer friend nearby, that I like them when they're very tender. And you take them very tender and you boil them and like super delicious. And that way you can eat the seed that is inside because it's not bitter. When you eat it ripe and you try to eat the seed, like I almost threw up the first time I had that experience because it's so bitter and it's so fibrous that I love them tender. And you just cook them tender and you chop them up and you mix them with rice. I felt like I was eating at a farmer's house back in the 1950s. Like I thought the whole experience was almost like sublime. The whole history that it has, and I think so beautiful. We use it a lot in a very traditional dish we call olla de carne, which is this like beef soup, very dense beef soup with a lot of vegetables on it. And tacaco, if you have a tacaco and an olla de carne experience, I think it's like the real experience, right? So very cool crop, very endangered crop, super tricky to germinate because it's like it's still running wild. Like if you try to take the fruit and just like throw it there and try to germinate it. I have a friend that works in the investigation lab center in the university that she's doing the thesis on how to try and um, make the process for germination better and more technical for increasing tacaco farmers at a national level, because there is a demand for it, but you have to make like some incisions in a very ripe fruit to allow water to go in, and then the decomposition of the meat material that it's inside liberates special substances and molecules and amino acids that the seed needs specifically to try and germinate. So kind of tricky. We got chayote. Chayote, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but it's the vegetable pear. They also call it mango squash in the States. They grow it more in the southern parts of the States. Very important traditional crop from the Mesoamerican areas, all the way from Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica. Costa Ricans love chayotes. There's a huge industry for chayotes. There's even like exporting farms of chayote in Ujaraz Valley, on the east section of the Central Valley in Costa Rica, main export farms. And just the diversity of chayotes there is out there is like, it's a cucurbit. It's from the Cucurbitaceae family. Actually, it's the same gender of the tacaco I showed you on the previous slide. Um, but very well domesticated plant. I love cocoro varieties. We call cocoro the ones that are quite small. There's green ones and there's white ones. There's fleshy ones. There's more watery ones. There's more like potato texture ones. The diversity is huge. It's a vining plant. It's an imperfect flower, the same as a squash. And you can grow it in the States, depending on the area where you're at. More in southern states like Georgia or Louisiana, I think you grow them all year round. But I think it's resistant to vernalization processes or mild winter areas. Like if you chop the plant like from the bottom and you like kind of mulch it very well and let like the root system stand there, then it can sprout back in the springtime. So I think that's technique. But vegetable pears, or chayotes, as you call them in Costa Rica, they're super important. Um, Usually, a lot of Mesoamerican vegetables that we have the name for them, like chayotes or tomates or apazotes or aguacates. All the words that end on the letters TE, they usually derive from Nahuatl language, and they all have very Mesoamerican context and culture to them. You see another example, coyote. Super wild plant, coyote. It's another great example. Very endangered crop. Not a lot of people know about it. Still, I rarely see this plant. When I see an individual like in the wild or in a farm, like I'm always surprised. Conolobus edulis and Taylorianus. There's two different species, but they're used in the same way. They're very weird looking, peculiar fruits, super wild, but you can also replant them from seed quite easily. They're kind of bland in the texture, in the flavor. Usually, traditionally, like the grandmas used to eat them like with sugar cane. They also call them gallinitas because their seeds are covered like kind of like dandelion kind of structures, and they look like feathers from the chicken. So gallinita is chicken in English, or little chicken. So it's even from the Apocynaceae family. It's family from the milkweed, super poisonous botanical family, but this one is quite edible. And indigenous community eat it just like tender, like raw, and they roast it on fires, like just like very rustically. So I think it's a very interesting variety. Zapallo Cartago, it's a Cucurbita pepo, it's a zucchini family, super cultural, important in the north region of where I told you where all these cancer areas are in the country. We've been saving this variety in Semillas Plantae. I've heard a lot of old-time farmers' stories about the variety. It's been hard for me to get like pure strains, trying to recuperate it. A lot of cross pollinations that made the variety way more bitter. So we've been trying to recuperate some good strains. It's a viney kind of plant. It's a cucurbita pepo, but not a bushy type. It's more viney, super productive, great in texture. It has this beautiful like how do you call them, the grooves. It has this beautiful grooves on the sides, kind of oblong shape. A lot of cultural value. When I buy commercial seedlings from a conventional farmer in the Cartago region, I told him about the variety, and he was super surprised. Like, no way you have seeds from that variety. I haven't seen it since my grandparents grew it, and so we're doing a lot of work on trying to really save the variety. Um, Usually, it's eating in picadillos. Picadillos in Costa Rica is like the typical dish where you get this vegetable, usually squashes or chayotes, the vegetable pears, or potatoes, and you cut them in little squares or little stripes, and then you mix them with the famous olores, which is the basic combination of onion, pepper, garlic, and oil, and you fry it all together, and then you mix the vegetable in little squares, and then you mix it with minced meat or chicken meat or something, or it can be a vegetarian dish as well. And this is a typical picadillo, Costa Rican culture. Chicasquil, it's an incredible plant. It's one of the few domesticated Mesoamerican trees. It's been so domesticated that it's almost lost its capacity for sexual reproduction by seed. You only can reproduce it by asexual reproduction with a piece of the branch. Super easy to reproduce. Very important cultural value. Like old time farmers used to have this in all their fencing areas. Incredible rich mineral and protein source. It's like the heirloom superfood uh, tree that grows on your fencing, right? It's like super high in protein. It has some oxalates that you have to dissolve before you eat it. So you have to, it's a perennial, right? It's a perennial tree. Not very big, maybe like 5 or 4 meters tall, and super ornamental as well. And you take the leaves and you have to boil them maybe like for 15 or 20 minutes so you can dissolve the oxalates, and then you can consume them. Kind of tricky if you're at a dinner party or like at a party and you have this for the leaves are very like they're, I don't know, like they kind of strainy, and when you eat them, like they always get like stuck on your teeth. So when you stop eating, you have to go in the mirror and make sure you're not smiling to everybody with all the leaves going on in your teeth. But super delicious, great taste, and really a superfood, incredible food. um Very rural, very traditional. It's an euphorbiaceae. Finally, I wanted to talk to you about an example I have, a corn breeding project I had in the farm, in El Tablazo farm. I'm starting to do breeding projects and enhancement of open pollinated varieties. This is a great example. In Costa Rica, we call cuarenteno corns many different varieties. If you go to farming communities and rural communities, they always say like, oh yeah, I have a cuarenteno variety over there. Like usually there's many kinds. There's white ones, there's yellow ones. But what they mean with these varieties is that they're early maturing varieties. So it takes for them around 40 or 50 days to mature the grain, right? Since they starting developing the grain, like they mature pretty fast. So this story is pretty cool. When I used to go to the farmers markets quite a while ago, I did it for maybe 6 years, farmers markets, and the security guard of the farmers market was a good friend of my colleague of my friend that was on the other booth. And this friend came along and said, man, I got like this corn, this Creole corn from the security guard of the farmers market. That's the stories of how seeds get to your hand. And he presented to me like this incredible corn that some of the grains had a particular like physical characteristics to them. They were kind of like striped with this beautiful wine, like orange deep color. And I said, my friend, like, can I keep it? And said like, yeah, sure, keep this cup. And just like a kid with an experiment, I started with the farm like 5 years ago with this corn, like only selected for the striped grains. And then I went with 100 plants, and I went to 200 plants, and it started showing like this incredible characteristics of rustic, being super wind resistant. I have these crazy wind situations in my farm. Like I have to struggle a lot with wind, like 80 or 100 kilometer per hour winds, like on the wind season. And it was just standing there like this great soldier, like super healthy and super strong. And the cups start getting bigger, and the stripes start getting more often. And nowadays I offer it in the catalog from a Creole strain of Cuarenteno, from Cuarenteno corn that came from the highlands of the northern region. And it's been a very popular variety that's been like circling around the country and with the customers and with the whole communities. And super proud of taking a Creole variety and selecting for the traits that I desired, and just how beautiful it is, and just reflecting the effort, of getting a variety and getting so involved and committed to it. So yeah, I think that's like the last thing I wanted to show you guys, about a little bit the glimpse of our diversity, and a little bit of the context. I hope you guys really enjoyed the presentation, and sharing these kind of experiences. So thank you. um, I think I can share the presentation. It's open, it's free for everybody, so I think you'll have access to it. There's my email, there's a website, semillasplantae.com. We have an English version. We don't ship seeds to the US right now, so I cannot help you with you guys with that right now, but we're looking into it. We're going to start shipping first to other Central American countries and seeing other options, but we got the website of the farm as well, Finca El Tablazo, and a phrase I love: in the heart of each seed, generations dance in silent harmony. So seeds are really just a legacy of thousands of years, and that's how they should be seen. So thank you guys. Thank you, Mike. I don't know if you can do a little bit of a question section or something.
Yeah, wow. Gabriel, thank you so much.
Sure.
What just what an incredible presentation, and sharing the journey that you've gone through from, the very beginning, self-identifying as a kid from the city, and to the place that you are now. I have very similar experiences in my life that have brought me into gardening and into agriculture, and it's yeah, it's an inspiration to hear the work that you're doing. I have a quick question for you, and please, if anybody that's on the that's here and watching, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat as well. But a bit of a personal question for you, as you kind of again self-identify as a neo rural person, agriculturalist, right? And I know that in my life, that there were moments in time that really stand out to me as I think about like how like those transformative moments that kind of spun my life in a direction that I wasn't thinking that it was going to go. And I wonder how, being in the city and finding yourself where you are now, are there experiences or moments in time that you can that come to mind that think about, oh, this was that moment where really, my idea or lens or the way that I was looking at things changed?
I think that's a great question, and I have it. I have that moment, and I think it's kind of special because that moment happened exactly where I am giving this presentation right now. I'm at my parents' house in the city because I was kind of insecure about the reliance of the internet back in the farm,
Hmm.
and I think it was my early 20s. I had this like existential emotional crisis that I think never went away. I think I still have it, but since that moment, I said like, "What the hell am I doing? Like, what am I doing with my life? What do I feel about my life that is significant? What like I always had the essence of being connected to something more natural. I had this since I was a kid. I think so. Like I always loved the mountain. I think I always loved trees. I always loved the rivers. I always loved the ocean. But I started like really getting involved with plants. And just one day I woke up and I said like, what would it be like to grow something? It was out of the bloom, like I just woke up that day in my early 20s and said like, what would it be like to have something growing, And I think this was, I don't know, an eureka moment, something spiritual, something from providence, something from just coincidence. I don't know. And
Yeah.
my grandmother had her backyard two houses from me, and it was like this backyard only with like typical like grandmother flowers, beautiful, but it had a lot of space. And I said like, Grandma, you want to grow something? I had this epiphany, like, you want to start growing stuff? And she said like, sure, like I've always wanted to grow stuff. And that's the moment I really got bonded with my grandmother. We developed like this beautiful relationship where that's where my really like my farming experience started. I had this garden maybe like for 4 years going, and it just when it started, it became an obsession, and an
Hmm.
obsession, and an obsession, and never in a million years I thought I would end up like where I'm right now. But that's how it all started, like with this idea, this was implanted in my brain somehow, and it just became an obsession. Really,
Yeah.
I think you kind of have to be like a little bit obsessive about the whole thing, because if you're not like you're not gonna make it, like so hard.
Right.
It's so hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
We're getting a lot of, a lot of just wonderful, wonderful comments. People that
Thank
are
you,
just,
guys.
thank
Thank you.
you, thankful for you sharing your story. I mean, and I would agree with, with Carolyn, it was really educational. There are just, the work that it takes to kind of do what you're doing, the ways in which you're kind of exploring and growing, the obvious, deep knowledge that you have about the things that you're growing and that you're working with, and how, how they're a part of your community and how you navigate in that space are just, it was really a joy to listen to.
Thank you so much.
And again, from Connie. Um, Let me see here. Oh, yeah, and here, Camilla, who said, I've seen a similar trend emerging in Chile, with some farmers in my family with a sudden interest in youth to move from Santiago to a nearby rural regions. It's been inspiring to study. Thank you for sharing your experience. Um, I wonder if you could tell us just really quickly. We've got just a couple of minutes here. Tell us about the land that you're on, and how you found the land that you're on, and what that looks like, and to help us think. I mean, it's one of the things that I think, as there are a lot of young folks here, your age, and younger, that are really, looking to agriculture as a way of life, as a way to be able to, be inspired and centered, and feel, just kind of the tangible value that comes along with growing things.
Hmm.
But one of the challenges here is to find land to be able to do
Yeah.
that work on. And what does that look like where you're at?
Actually, I had that in my introduction, but I skipped it. So it's
Okay.
good you asked, because I had so much I wanted to like put
Great.
in.
Yeah.
But yeah, the land I'm in right now is well, I started out with my wife, as I mentioned, and it's 1 hectare of land, so it's 10,000 square meters. So it's around an acre and a half. Around 30 or 40% of the land is in vegetation, secondary vegetation area, going to like more mature forest. So we keep them that way for keeping like this biological niche for the wildlife around, because we're surrounded by a very natural wild mountain on the southern mountain range. We got a lot of wildlife going. So it has a great topography, very very gentle slopes, great rested soil when we started out. And the story of the land, really, I think we're very privileged and we're very lucky on how it all started out, because this was a land that was on my family from my mother's side. My grandfather, he dedicated himself to real estate back in the 60s, 5 decades ago, 6 decades ago, when Costa Rica was like super rural, right? We're talking about very different times and very different context. And he used to buy a lot of land all around the country, and like sometimes it's with super informal legal papers and stuff like that. And this piece of land particularly um, was like a leftover piece of land that was inherited to my grandmother when they started like kind of like getting the uncles started getting involved with all that was going on with these properties when my grandfather died.
Mhm.
And I always heard my father like saying like, hey, let's go do a picnic to your grandfather's land. And it's like it's 10 miles away from where we live in the city, so it's like super close, but very like way more rural. And I went there maybe like a couple of times, and I always remember like this beautiful pasture land with the cows of the neighbor passing around, like surrounded by forest. And but it just was like on the back of my mind, you know.
Hmm.
When I started farming and getting more involved with the gardening, we had the experience of going to see a lot of farms in Costa Rica. Like my wife and I said, like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do it right. We're gonna do it with professionalism. We're gonna do it with with very technical knowledge, and like the typical story, you know, like families were
Yeah.
super skeptical. Like, what are you gonna do with farming? And
Right.
typical thing, you know.
Yeah.
But when I finally we started our whole education process, like I'm sick of studying. Like I want practical work. I want to
Yeah.
farm. And I told my wife, like, I remember this piece of land. I know it's lingering there in the family. I remember the picnics. Let's go check it out. I think it may have the conditions. And boom, like we went there, and it was just like everything was perfect. You know, like
Yeah.
the soil was rested, a lot of pasture land. It was like a white canvas where we could design the whole project from scratch.
Yeah.
Water sources and water springs next to forest areas with wildlife that we love. 10 miles away from the central district, from the central center district to commercialized product, and so on and so on. So
Yeah.
it just became like this little experiment. We told the family, like, we had other businesses, we had other jobs, so we worked the farm early in the mornings and then went to our other jobs in the afternoon and the nights. And we said like a little experiment to tell my mother, like, hey, just lend us the land, we're going to experiment a bit, you're not doing anything with it, is that fine? She said, like, it's fine, like, I'm not doing
Yeah.
anything with it, that's worthless. She didn't say it that way, but that's more or less like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with that land. You know, it's not in the
Sure.
city. It's like
Sure.
it's not has a
Yeah.
lot. It doesn't have a lot of value.
Yeah.
And then we grabbed the land, and it became like this massive avalanche of 4 years into the project that everything was
Yeah.
progressing so much. And the family said, like, you guys are doing something like super special. Like, keep the land. So then we were able to keep the land, and that's how we started, and that's how we are there. You know, like.
It's awesome.
And I always feel super privileged for the opportunity that we had, because access to land is so hard. You know, it's
Yeah.
so hard. Like, it's ridiculous almost.
Yeah. For sure. Well, Gabriel, you're an inspiration. I appreciate you sharing your story and your work.
Thank you.
You joked early on about having to do all things, including website design.
Hmm.
I've had the opportunity to look at both of the sites that you have. There's a lot of information, a lot of clear dedication and work and passion that have gone into all of the things that you're doing there. So definitely advocate for people to go and explore that and to see the video that you shared with us as well. And don't be surprised if you have people reaching out to you saying, "How do I get to your farm?"
Perfect.
Including myself.
Perfect.
Good luck with the rest of your growing season and your travels as you continue to educate yourself. And thanks for sharing your time with us.
Thank you,
Um,
guys. Thank
yeah,
you. I appreciate
absolutely.
the opportunity.
Yep. And one last thing, folks. So we have our last presentation of the day is with Teresa Peterson on the topic of "This Land is My Relative." It's set to be an incredible presentation as well. So continue to stick with us, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. So thanks a lot. Bye.